It is the absolute worst time of the year, and no, not because the holidays are just over, Christmas presents have been unwrapped, New Year's has been celebrated. No, it's because we are still deep in the middle of the NASCAR offseason. We haven't seen cars going in circles in months at this point, and it's becoming too much. To get my fix the last few weeks, I've been going back and watching a lot of old NASCAR races, ones that have been posted to YouTube, some by NASCAR's YouTube channel itself, some races I'd never seen before, some races I haven't seen in a long time, and as a result, almost daily I'm getting new races recommended to me. And yesterday, that mysterious YouTube algorithm pointed me towards the 2012 Napa Auto Parts 200, a NASCAR Nationwide Series race at Montreal. Circuit Villeneuve, however you say it's French. At first, I almost looked right past this video. I mean, it's just another NASCAR Nationwide Series race from 8 years ago. Who really cares? But then I remembered this was the infamous shoe race. Those of you who've been watching NASCAR for a number of years will likely remember that weekend. 2012 was the golden era of Danica mania. Danica Patrick, of course, a big name from open wheel racing, was trying to make the sudden and quick transition into the NASCAR world, and it had been fairly slow going. Besides the occasional good run at a super speedway, the only track she somewhat stood out at were the road courses. Of course, with her IndyCar background, that was not super surprising. I remember exactly where I was when I watched this race live, and I remember the disappointment I felt because, I know this is going to sound shocking to y'all, I was a low-key Danica Patrick fan in 2012. Now look, I didn't own any hats, t-shirts, I don't even own any Danica Patrick, no I do because I used to do videos with them, but I never went out of my way to buy any sort of Danica Patrick merch. I did not cheer for her on Sunday ever, but in 2012 I was excited about all the hype. I mean, I was 14 years old, I didn't know any better. I figured, oh, she's great in IndyCar, she might be great in NASCAR. I didn't at the time realize how steep that mountain was, but I thought it was great. I wanted to see Danica Patrick do well because I wanted to see the sport succeed and thrive. So I vividly remember to this day my disappointment I felt when the shoe incident happened at Montreal back in 2012. So I rewatched this race yesterday, and I did some research because all these years we remember the shoe incident as the incident that took Danica Patrick out of maybe her best performance in her NASCAR career. But not everyone will remember what led up to that race, and not everyone knows exactly what happened to Danica Patrick in that race. Was it the shoe? Was it a completely unrelated mechanical issue? I think this incident deserves revisiting, so we're going to talk about it. This may have been Danica Patrick's single greatest NASCAR performance, and unfortunately, her chances of winning went up in smoke just like that. Danica Patrick made her NASCAR Xfinity Series, then NASCAR Nationwide Series debut in 2010, but she didn't begin racing full-time until the 2011 season. 2011 was quite the struggle, but many saw that as a learning year. 2012, she was again running full-time Xfinity and also making a handful of Cup Series starts for Stewart-Haas Racing. I know, she really skyrocketed through the ranks. Montreal was the 22nd race of the 2012 season. At that point, Danica Patrick only had one top 10 on the season. It was back at Texas. She finished a season best 8th, but perhaps her best performance of the season came at Road America, the first road course on the schedule, when on the white flag lap she was running 4th until contact from Jacques Villeneuve sent her around. She ended up finishing 12th still. But while Danica struggled at ovals throughout her entire career pretty much, she showed early on that the road courses were occasionally a bright spot for her. The week before Montreal was Watkins Glen, the second road course of the season, and Danica never even finished the first lap without incident. In the very first turn of the very first lap, Ryan Truex went around and slid right back up onto the track in front of Danica Patrick, completely destroyed her right front. You could say a more experienced driver would have known how to avoid that, but really I chalk most of that up to bad luck. She didn't even get to complete one lap at Watkins Glen, so Danica Patrick was pretty down heading into Montreal, but as Ricky Craven noted early on in the ESPN broadcast,
I'm telling you that this is the first time, and I wasn't at Road America, but this is the first time that I felt really optimistic about Danica Patrick's chances of winning a race.
Montreal was perhaps Danica's best opportunity to shine all season long. The early portion of the race was dominated by Sam Hornish Jr. and Jacques Villeneuve, who was kind of the hometown favorite, being a French Canadian racing in Montreal. I mean, you could hear the crowd anytime he just go by. There's like vuvuzelas and stuff like. It certainly did not sound like your conventional NASCAR crowd, but Danica Patrick ran in the top 5. She started 4th in this race and actually drove up to 2nd before the first cycle of pit stops. During that cycle of pit stops, a caution came out. Danica had already pit. Jacques Villeneuve had not pit, so Danica Patrick on the restart assumed the race lead. And sure, this was just a NASCAR Nationwide Series race, but there were plenty of solid drivers in this event. I mean, there's some road course specialists like Jacques Villeneuve, obviously, Ron Fellows. I mentioned Sam Hornish Jr. among many others. Of course, there are also some solid solid Xfinity Series regulars. Justin Allgaier, Elliott Sadler, Austin Dillon, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Kyle Busch was even in this race. But Danica Patrick drove off and led for nearly 20 laps when suddenly...
That is someone's shoe. And bam, drop kicks it.
A sneaker. I don't know, what would you say that is? Like, size 7, 8, a men's 8. I mean, a pretty small sneaker. Not the biggest, not one of my shoes. Goodness gracious. I mean, look at one of my sneakers. Goodness gracious. This thing could take out a monster truck. A fan, for whatever reason, decided to chuck their shoe out onto the track, and Danica, being the race leader, was the first driver to get to it and hit it dead on. Moments later, she radioed to her crew that she felt her steering was messed up.
Something's wrong with my steering.
Now, despite her constantly radioing her team that there are issues with the car, she held on to the lead for another 2 laps roughly before eventually getting passed. A few laps later, a caution came out, Danica's team went to pit road, and then eventually went behind the wall, went back into the garage area. The team said they had a broken left rear axle. Fans watching from home, fans watching at the track, all speculated that the shoe, the sneaker, that size 7, that was a small shoe. The shoe is what ultimately ended Danica Patrick's career day. Is that true? I mean, for what it's worth, NASCAR reported later that they did find the fan and kick them out of the facility. I can't imagine that was very hard to find. Just look for the guy or whoever it is with one shoe, hobbling around. NASCAR confiscated the shoe itself. I imagine some NASCAR official in like a hazmat suit with sponsor logos on it, of course, treating the shoe like a biohazard, putting it safely into some facility somewhere. I don't know, that just puts a funny image in my head, but the fan was kicked out. I don't know if the fans ever attended another NASCAR race since then. Someone needs to follow up with that fan, whoever it may be, if they're willing to speak on the record. My goodness, that would be interesting. For what it's worth, Danica Patrick did get back out on the track several laps down. She ended up finishing 27th in the race, a far cry from where she ran that first half. But did the shoe have anything to do with it? There are articles and things written afterwards about, the shoe. It was Danica Patrick has a great day, and Zerly, the shoe. It was the shoe heard around the racing world, but did it have anything to do with Danica's mechanical failures? Crew chief Tony Uri Jr. says no, telling ESPN just days later the shoe didn't have anything to do with it. It was funny listening to everybody talk about the shoe. I've never done that before. It could have done something to the splitter or went through the radiator just as easy and took the radiator out, but as far as the problems we had with the car, it was no relation. For what it's worth, during the race broadcast itself, a while after the shoe incident occurred, they reported that Danica had issues with the steering at the very beginning of the race. So, I don't know, that didn't stop people from talking about the shoe. Tony Uri Jr. went on to tell ESPN, basically what happened was the car was wheel hopping so much, she wheel hopped it a couple times getting deep into a brake zone, it basically stretched the U-bolts and the pinion shims came out, so that loosened the truck arms up. You put new axles in before the race, you do all this stuff, and it's just a combination of jumping curbs. You can see all the pictures of cars a foot in the air, and when you're under full power and one tire's on the ground and the other is not, and it slaps the ground, it puts so much stress on those axles. Basically, that's what happens. We basically just jumped too many curbs and we paid the price. I love how in racing it's always we. Tony Uri Jr. didn't jump any curbs. He was not behind the wheel of that race car. He wasn't telling Danica how to drive it, but you'll hear drivers say that too. We had a fast car, we had issues today. It's always we. It's very sweet. It's sharing the blame while also sharing the glory. At least they're consistent. I'll give them that. But according to Tony Uri Jr., it was not the shoe that ended Danica Patrick's beautiful run. In fact, it sounds like if anything, it was Danica herself. Hey, jumping curbs at road courses, braking, things like that. We see that all the time. I mean, the best drivers, it happens to them too. Certainly could have had something to do with how the car was set up, the parts they were using, the strain being put on them, how they configured the car before the race, definitely. But all these years, many fans have been led to believe that that shoe played some sort of role, and it did, because at least in the moment, right after it happened, Danica was thinking about it, and that was affecting maybe how she was driving the car. But mechanically speaking, the shoe, at least according to Tony Uri Jr., didn't have anything to do with the issues they had in that race. But I remember watching that race as a kid and being very disappointed, because while I wasn't a big Danica Patrick fan, I'll reiterate, I did not own any sort of Danica Patrick merchandise, I swear. I wanted to see her do well. This was all the way back in 2012. She'd only been in NASCAR for like a year and a half. I still believed that maybe she would do something great one day. Obviously, that day never really came. But I remember the disappointment I felt when I saw that 7 car take a left-hand turn into the garage area. I mean, even the broadcasters sounded a bit disappointed. You could tell, really, throughout Danica's career, but especially those first few years, the NASCAR media wanted her to do well, mainly for ratings, probably. They understand as well as I understood at the time that if Danica does well, that's good for the sport of stock car racing because she was already extremely popular. Imagine if she won some trophies to go along with that popularity. Oh my goodness, it would have been insane. Danica Mania would have been a real thing at that point, but the wins never came despite the media's best encouragement. But I remember this 2012 Napa Auto Parts 200 from Montreal as one of the most disappointing NASCAR nationwide races I had ever watched. And many people only remember it for that little black shoe that landed there on the back straightaway. As much as that shoe stole the show, it doesn't sound like it had any real effect on Danica Patrick's performance. And unfortunately, Danica Patrick went winless her entire NASCAR career. And if not for all of these issues, perhaps that day at Montreal was the day she could have gotten it done. She had a fast car. She was holding off some really good road course racers. Let me just tell y'all, you just never know. I mean, that race had a pretty chaotic ending. Justin Allgaier swooped in to take the win on a green-white checkered restart. So all bets were really off, but Danica Patrick would have been in contention if not for the shoe and all the mechanical issues that followed. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I thought it'd be fun to sit back and discuss an older race. I mean, this race is only like 8-9 years old at this point. Ooh, it's 2021 now. It's gonna be harder to do that math. 2020 was easy. If something happened in 2012, that's 8 years ago. Now 2021, I have to think a tiny bit harder. I have to use one extra brain cell, and that's just too much. But thank you all for watching. Thanks for sharing this trip down memory lane with me. I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.